The day the police came to arrest me, I thought it was a mistake. I had never stolen anything in my life. I had never been in trouble. Yet there I was, standing in handcuffs while my neighbors watched from their windows. What broke me wasn't the accusation. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was seeing my own sister standing behind our mother, pretending to cry while everyone blamed me. I kept saying, I didn't do it, but nobody listened. Not my family, not my friends, not even my fiancé. For months, I carried the shame of a crime I never committed. I lost people I loved. I lost my reputation. I almost lost hope. Then one unexpected phone call exposed the truth. The person who framed me wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an enemy. It was my own sister. And the reason she did it shattered our family forever. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Emily Parker, and until I was 29 years old, I believed my younger sister Rachel was one of the most important people in my life. We grew up in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. Our parents were hard-working people who taught us the value of honesty, kindness, and responsibility. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people wished they had. We celebrated holidays together. We took road trips every summer. We spent birthdays gathered around the same dining room table. When people saw us together, they often said how lucky we were to be so close. For most of my childhood, I believed that was true. Rachel was 3 years younger than me. She followed me everywhere when we were kids. If I joined a school club, she wanted to join when she got older. If I learned a new hobby, she wanted to learn it too. Our mother often joked that Rachel treated me more like a hero than a sister. I remember teaching her how to ride a bicycle. I remember helping her with homework. I remember sitting beside her bed during thunderstorms, because she was terrified of lightning. When she cried, I was usually the first person she called. At least that's what I thought. Looking back now, there were signs I missed. Signs that seemed harmless at the time. Signs that only made sense years later. Whenever relatives praised me for good grades or achievements, I would notice Rachel becoming unusually quiet. Whenever family members compared us, even in a positive way, her smile seemed forced. At the time, I blamed it on normal sibling rivalry. Every family has moments like that. Every brother and sister gets jealous from time to time. I never imagined those feelings were growing into something much bigger. As adults, our lives moved in different directions. I became a project coordinator for a healthcare company. Rachel worked at a marketing agency downtown. We still saw each other regularly. We still celebrated birthdays together. We still spent holidays under the same roof. If someone had asked me then whether I trusted my sister, I would have answered without hesitation. Absolutely. That answer would eventually become the biggest mistake of my life. The year everything changed started out as the happiest year I had ever experienced. My fiancé, Jason, had proposed the previous spring. We had spent months planning our wedding. We had chosen a venue overlooking a lake. We had started discussing future children. For the first time, life felt stable, predictable, safe, the kind of life people spend years hoping to build. Then Thanksgiving arrived. Every year, our family gathered at my grandmother's house. It was a tradition that stretched back decades. Cousins traveled from different states. Aunts and uncles crowded into the kitchen. Football played on television while children ran through the hallways. The house was always loud, warm, and full of life. That year felt no different, at least at first. I remember arriving around noon. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house. My grandmother greeted everyone at the front door. My father was already helping in the kitchen. Rachel arrived shortly after me. She hugged me and complimented my engagement ring. We laughed. We took family photos. We spent the afternoon exactly the way we always had. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed wrong. And that is what makes what happened next so difficult to understand. Because while the rest of us were celebrating, someone in that house was quietly setting a trap. A trap that had only one target: me. Here's part 2, continuing directly from where part 1 ended. The first sign that something was wrong came shortly after dinner. Most of the family had moved into the living room to watch football, while others stayed behind to clean the kitchen. I was helping my grandmother pack leftovers into containers when I heard raised voices coming from upstairs. At first, I ignored it. Family gatherings were always noisy. Someone was always arguing about sports, politics, or old family stories. But within seconds, the tone changed. The voices became sharper, more urgent. Then I heard my aunt call my father's name. The entire house seemed to pause at once. My grandmother looked at me with concern and slowly set down the container she was holding. We both walked toward the staircase. By the time we reached the second floor, several relatives had already gathered outside my grandmother's bedroom. Nobody was speaking. The atmosphere felt strange, heavy. I pushed my way through the crowd and saw my grandmother standing beside her dresser. One of the drawers had been pulled open. Her face had turned pale. "What happened?" I asked. Nobody answered immediately. Then my uncle cleared his throat. "The necklace is gone." I stared at him, confused. "What necklace?" "My mother's necklace," he said. "The family necklace." Everyone in the family knew exactly which necklace he meant. It wasn't valuable because of money. It was valuable because of history. My great-grandfather had given it to my great-grandmother decades earlier. Every generation had protected it. My grandmother often said it was one of the few family treasures that carried memories instead of a price tag. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Maybe it's misplaced," I said. My grandmother slowly shook her head. I checked 3 times. The room grew silent. One by one, family members began searching the house. Drawers were opened. Closets were checked. Bags were examined. Every room was searched. At first, nobody seemed suspicious. Everyone assumed the necklace would eventually turn up. Someone probably moved it. Someone probably forgot where it had been placed. But as the minutes passed, optimism disappeared. The necklace was nowhere to be found. I remember looking around the room and noticing Rachel standing near the doorway. She looked nervous. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. At the time, I thought she was simply worried like everyone else. I couldn't have been more wrong. Nearly an hour later, my father suggested that everyone gather downstairs, while a few relatives continued searching. Most people agreed. The evening was already becoming uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to believe a family member could be responsible. Then, my cousin Brandon came down the stairs. The expression on his face instantly made my heart race. "I found something," he said. The room went silent. My grandmother stood up. "What did you find?" Brandon hesitated. Then he looked directly at me. "It was in Emily's room." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "My room?" He nodded. Every eye in the room shifted toward me. I felt the air leave my lungs. "What are you talking about?" Brandon swallowed. "The necklace." My stomach dropped. "What?" "The necklace was inside your bag." The silence that followed felt endless. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. "That's ridiculous." Nobody laughed with me. Nobody spoke. I looked around the room and saw something I had never seen before. Doubt. In my father's eyes. In my mother's face. Even in Jason's expression. The people who had trusted me my entire life were suddenly questioning everything. I stood up immediately. "There has to be some mistake." My grandmother looked devastated. "Emily." "No," I interrupted. "I didn't take it." My voice cracked. "I swear I didn't." My mother slowly approached me. "Then how did it end up in your bag?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. The necklace had never been in my possession. I had never touched it. Yet somehow it had appeared inside a travel bag sitting in the guest room, where I had placed my things earlier that afternoon. The situation made no sense. And the more I tried to explain it, the worse it sounded. Family members began whispering among themselves. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared openly. For the first time in my life, I understood how quickly people can begin believing the worst when evidence appears to support it. I looked toward Jason. Out of everyone in the room, I expected him to defend me, to stand beside me, to tell everyone this couldn't possibly be true. Instead, he remained silent. The disappointment in his eyes hurt more than any accusation. I turned toward Rachel. She immediately wrapped her arms around me. "Emily, it's okay," she whispered. Those words should have comforted me. Instead, something about them felt strange, almost rehearsed. I couldn't explain it then, but years later, that moment would replay in my mind again and again. Because while everyone else was shocked by what had happened, Rachel already knew exactly where the necklace would be found. She had known all along. And before the night was over, the situation was about to become far worse than anyone could have imagined. The drive home that night was one of the longest drives of my life. Jason sat beside me in complete silence. The radio was off. The only sound inside the car was the steady hum of the tires against the road. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, trying to understand how a family necklace had somehow ended up inside my bag. Every possible explanation sounded impossible. Maybe someone had moved it by mistake. Maybe one of the children had picked it up while playing. Maybe there was something everyone was missing. But no matter how many possibilities I considered, none of them explained why it had been found among my belongings. I finally turned toward Jason. "You believe me, right?" The question hung in the air for several seconds. He kept his eyes on the road. "I want to." The answer hit harder than I expected. "What does that mean?" He sighed heavily. "It means I don't know what to think." I felt my chest tighten. "Jason, I didn't do it. I know what you're saying. No, listen to me. I didn't do it." He gripped the steering wheel. "Then how did it get there?" There it was again. The same question everyone kept asking. The same question I couldn't answer. When we arrived home, neither of us spoke much. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of my family staring at me. I saw my grandmother's disappointment. I saw my mother's confusion. I saw Jason's uncertainty. And I saw Rachel, standing quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold. The following morning, I woke up to several missed calls from relatives. A few messages appeared on my phone. Some were supportive. Others were carefully worded attempts to get my side of the story. A few people didn't even bother hiding their suspicions. By noon, I received a call from my father. His voice sounded exhausted. "We need to talk." My stomach dropped. I drove to my parents' house immediately. When I arrived, both my parents were waiting in the living room. Rachel was sitting beside my mother. The moment I entered the room, I knew something was wrong. Nobody smiled. Nobody greeted me. My father looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. I sat down slowly. "What happened?" My father exchanged a glance with my mother. Then he spoke. "Grandma reported the necklace stolen." For a moment, I simply stared at him. "What?" "She filed a police report this morning." I felt the blood drain from my face. "She thinks I stole it?" My mother looked away. My father remained silent. That silence was answer enough. I stood up. "This is insane." My voice echoed through the room. "I've spent my whole life proving I'm trustworthy." My father rubbed his forehead. "We know this is difficult." "Difficult," I repeated. "You're talking about a criminal investigation." Rachel finally spoke. "I'm sure everything will get sorted out." I looked at her. Something about her calmness bothered me. Everyone else looked devastated. Everyone else looked stressed. Rachel looked almost relaxed. The thought disappeared as quickly as it arrived. I was too overwhelmed to focus on it. The next few days became a nightmare. Detectives contacted me. Questions were asked. Statements were taken. Every conversation felt like an interrogation. Every explanation sounded weak because I had no evidence to support it. All I had was the truth. And unfortunately, the truth wasn't enough. People often believe justice is simple. They believe innocence naturally reveals itself. But real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes appearances are stronger than facts. Sometimes people decide what they believe before hearing the whole story. Within days, rumors began spreading beyond my family. Friends started acting differently. Co-workers became distant. People who once greeted me warmly suddenly avoided conversations. Nobody accused me directly. They didn't need to. I could see it in their faces. The suspicion, the uncertainty, the judgment. Then things became even worse. A week after Thanksgiving, detectives requested another interview. I arrived at the station, hoping they had discovered new information. Instead, I learned they had found something else, something they believed connected me directly to the theft. I sat across from the investigator while he opened a folder. Inside were several printed photographs. He slid them across the table. My hands started shaking. The photos showed the necklace. Not in my bag, not at my grandmother's house, but in my apartment. More specifically, hidden inside a storage box in my bedroom closet. I stared at the images in disbelief. No. The investigator leaned forward. Can you explain this? No. I could barely speak. That's impossible. The necklace had apparently been discovered during a search, authorized by a warrant. The very item everyone believed I had stolen was sitting inside my apartment. I felt sick. Someone had planted it there. I knew it, but proving it was another matter entirely. The investigator folded his hands. Miss Parker, evidence continues to point in one direction. I shook my head repeatedly. You don't understand. Help me understand. I've never seen that necklace. He stared at me carefully. Then he said something that would stay with me for years. People say that more often than you'd think. At that moment, I realized something terrifying. Nobody was looking for the truth anymore. They believed they had already found it. The investigation moved quickly after that. Too quickly. Before Christmas arrived, formal charges were filed. The news spread through my family like wildfire. Calls stopped coming. Invitations disappeared. Friends stopped checking in. Jason became more distant every day. And through all of it, Rachel remained by my side. At least on the surface. She called often. She checked on me. She told everyone she believed in me. She played the role of a supportive sister so perfectly that nobody questioned her sincerity. Nobody except me. Because a small voice inside my head had started asking a question I couldn't ignore. Why did Rachel never seem surprised? Why did every new piece of evidence shock everyone except her? And why, whenever people discussed the case, did she always seem more interested in their reactions than in finding answers? At the time, I dismissed those thoughts. I told myself grief was making me paranoid. I told myself I was searching for someone to blame. What I didn't know was that my instincts were trying to warn me, because the person responsible for destroying my life was closer than I could ever imagine. And in less than a month, I would find myself standing in a courtroom, facing a future I never thought possible. Standing in a courtroom was something I had only experienced through television shows and movies. In those stories, innocent people always seemed to have a dramatic moment when the truth came out, and everyone realized a terrible mistake had been made. Real life was very different. Real life moved slowly. Real life was filled with uncertainty. And real life didn't care whether you were innocent or guilty. By the time my first court appearance arrived, I had already learned that lesson the hard way. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The walls felt cold. The atmosphere felt heavier than the air outside. As I walked inside, I could feel eyes following me. Some belonged to strangers. Others belonged to people I had known for years. Every glance felt like another judgment. Every whisper felt like another accusation. My parents sat together near the back of the room. They looked exhausted. My mother seemed to have aged years in just a few months. My father barely looked up when I entered. I understood why. They were trapped in an impossible situation. They wanted to believe their daughter was innocent, but every piece of evidence pointed in the opposite direction. Then I noticed Rachel. She was sitting beside my mother. The moment she saw me, she offered a sad smile. To everyone else, it probably looked comforting. To me, it felt strange. I couldn't explain why. At that point, I still wasn't actively suspecting her, but something about her behavior never seemed to match the seriousness of the situation. While everyone else looked overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty, Rachel always seemed strangely composed. The hearing itself was brief. The prosecution outlined the evidence. The necklace had been discovered in my travel bag. The necklace had later been found in my apartment. Multiple family members confirmed where it had been located. Everything sounded convincing when presented together. Listening to it all made me feel like I was hearing a story about someone else, because I knew the truth. I knew I had never touched that necklace. But truth and proof are not the same thing. That realization became more painful with every passing day. When the hearing ended, I stepped outside into the cold winter air, and immediately noticed reporters standing near the courthouse steps. There weren't many of them, but there were enough. My heart sank. I hadn't expected media attention. One reporter shouted a question. Another called my name. I lowered my head and continued walking. The next morning, my photograph appeared online, alongside headlines, questioning whether I had stolen a family heirloom. Seeing my face attached to words like theft and investigation felt surreal. The story spread much faster than I expected. People at work had already seen it. Neighbors had seen it. Former classmates had seen it. Suddenly, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some believed I was guilty. Others weren't sure. Very few openly supported me. One afternoon, I walked into a grocery store and noticed two women staring at me from the end of an aisle. They immediately looked away when our eyes met. A few minutes later, I heard one of them whisper my name. Moments like that became common. No matter where I went, I felt watched, judged, studied. The hardest part wasn't the strangers. It was the people I cared about. Friends stopped returning calls. Some stopped responding to messages entirely. Others offered vague excuses about being busy. The distance grew larger, every week. One by one, relationships I had spent years building began disappearing. Then came one of the most painful conversations of my life. Jason asked if we could meet. Part of me hoped he was finally ready to stand beside me. I hoped he had remembered the years we spent together. I hoped he would tell me he believed me. Instead, when I arrived at the restaurant, I immediately knew something was wrong. He looked nervous, uncomfortable. His engagement ring was no longer on his finger. My stomach tightened. Before either of us spoke, I already knew what was coming. Jason stared down at the table. I don't think I can do this anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. For several seconds I couldn't speak. What are you saying? He rubbed his face. I don't know what's true anymore. I felt tears forming in my eyes. So you're giving up on me? It's not that simple. It feels pretty simple. His voice cracked slightly. Emily, every piece of evidence points at you. I shook my head. And after everything we've been through, that's enough for you? The silence that followed gave me my answer. By the end of that conversation, our wedding was over. The future we had planned together disappeared in less than an hour. When I got home that night, I sat alone in my apartment and stared at the engagement photos hanging on the wall. I didn't cry immediately. I just sat there, numb, completely numb. The loneliness felt overwhelming. For the first time since this nightmare began, I truly understood how much I had lost. Not just my reputation, not just my relationships, my future. The future I thought was waiting for me had vanished. A few days later, Rachel stopped by my apartment. She brought coffee and pastries. She sat beside me on the couch and listened while I talked about Jason. She acted like the perfect sister, supportive, patient, compassionate. At one point, she even hugged me while I cried. Looking back now, that moment makes me sick. Because while I was mourning the destruction of my life, the person responsible for that destruction was sitting right beside me, and she knew something I didn't. She knew this wasn't over. She knew the lie was still growing. She knew there were details nobody had discovered yet. As Rachel prepared to leave that evening, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen. For just a second, her expression changed. It happened so quickly that most people would have missed it. But I saw it. A flash of panic. A flash of fear. Then it was gone. She smiled and slipped the phone back into her pocket. I didn't think much of it at the time. I wish I had. Because that single notification was connected to a secret that would eventually expose everything. A secret Rachel was desperately trying to keep hidden. And within weeks, the first crack in her carefully constructed story was about to appear. The weeks following my breakup with Jason were some of the darkest weeks of my life. Every morning felt like a battle. There were days when I didn't want to leave my apartment. Days when I ignored phone calls and let messages pile up unanswered. I spent hours staring out the window, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Less than a year earlier, I had been planning a wedding. Now I was fighting to convince people I wasn't a thief. The worst part was the uncertainty. If someone had told me exactly when my nightmare would end, I could have endured it. If someone had said, hold on for 6 months, or stay strong for 1 year, at least I would have had something to look forward to. But nobody could tell me that. As far as everyone else was concerned, the case against me was strong. Too strong. The necklace had been found in my belongings. The necklace had later been found in my apartment. Witnesses had seen both discoveries. Every fact seemed to support the same conclusion. Except none of it was true. The only thing I still had was my certainty. I knew I was innocent. Unfortunately, I was beginning to realize that innocence alone wasn't enough to save me. Rachel continued visiting regularly. She called almost every day. She brought groceries when I wasn't eating properly. She sat with me when I couldn't sleep. To anyone looking from the outside, she appeared to be the only person who never abandoned me. Even my parents had become distant. Not because they hated me, because they didn't know what to believe. Every conversation with them felt cautious, carefully measured, as though they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Rachel, on the other hand, never seemed hesitant. She always knew exactly what to say, exactly how to comfort me, exactly how to make herself appear supportive. One evening, she came over carrying takeout from my favorite restaurant. We spent hours talking about childhood memories. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Then something happened. Something small. Something most people would have ignored. We were discussing Thanksgiving, when Rachel casually mentioned the upstairs hallway outside Grandma's bedroom. I froze. A strange feeling passed through me. At first, I couldn't understand why. Then, it hit me. The detail she had mentioned didn't make sense. During the initial search for the necklace, nobody had been allowed upstairs after a certain point. Family members had been gathered downstairs, while only a few relatives continued looking. Yet Rachel described something that happened in the hallway during that exact period. A period when she shouldn't have been there. The realization lasted only seconds before I pushed it away. I told myself I was overthinking. People remember events differently all the time. But for the first time, an uncomfortable question entered my mind. How much did Rachel actually know about what happened that night? The thought lingered long after she left. A few days later, another strange thing happened. My cousin Brandon called unexpectedly. We hadn't spoken much since Thanksgiving. The conversation started awkwardly. Then he surprised me. Can I ask you something? Sure. When they found the necklace in your bag, did anyone actually see it before I opened the bag? I sat up immediately. What do you mean? I've been thinking about it. His voice sounded uncertain. The bag was already partially unzipped when I found it. My pulse quickened. And I don't remember checking the main compartment first. I frowned. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything. He paused. I'm just saying some parts of that night aren't sitting right with me anymore. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. Someone else was beginning to question what happened. Someone else was noticing inconsistencies. After the call ended, I replayed our conversation repeatedly. The more I thought about it, the more questions appeared. Questions I had never considered before. Questions nobody else seemed interested in asking. Who had access to my bag before it was searched? Who knew exactly where I had placed it? Who moved freely around the house that day? And why had nobody examined those possibilities? The next week brought another unexpected development. Rachel's longtime friend, Megan, reached out to me. Megan and Rachel had been close for years, close enough to share secrets, close enough to know things other people didn't. When her name appeared on my phone, I almost didn't answer. I was glad I did. At first, the conversation felt ordinary. She asked how I was doing. She asked about the case. Then her tone changed. Emily, can I ask something? Of course. There was a pause. A long pause. Almost as if she was deciding whether to continue. Finally, she spoke. Has Rachel been acting strange lately? The question caught me completely off guard. What do you mean? I don't know. She sounded nervous. She's just different. I waited. Megan, you're going to have to be more specific. Another pause followed. Then she lowered her voice. A few weeks before Thanksgiving, Rachel kept talking about you. I frowned. Talking about me how? She seemed angry. The word surprised me. Angry? Rachel had never acted angry toward me, at least not openly. What did she say? Megan hesitated again. I don't remember everything, but the hesitation in her voice suggested otherwise. It felt like she remembered much more than she was willing to admit. Before ending the call, she said something that stayed with me. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm overthinking. I just felt like you should know. That night, I barely slept. The pieces didn't fit together yet. Not even close. But for the first time since my arrest, I felt a shift. Tiny cracks were beginning to appear in the story everyone had accepted as truth. Tiny cracks in the version of events that had destroyed my life. And somewhere beyond those cracks, hidden beneath months of lies and assumptions, the truth was waiting. What I didn't know was that Rachel had already started noticing those cracks too. And she was becoming afraid. Very afraid. Because the closer people got to the truth, the harder it would become for her to keep pretending. And soon, one careless mistake would start unraveling everything she had worked so hard to hide. For months, I had felt like I was drowning, while everyone around me stood safely on shore. No matter how loudly I shouted, nobody seemed willing to hear me. Every explanation I offered was dismissed. Every attempt to defend myself ran into the same wall of evidence. But after my conversations with Brandon and Megan, something changed inside me. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I stopped focusing on proving my innocence, and started asking a different question. What if someone had planned this? The thought terrified me, not because it sounded impossible, because it suddenly sounded possible. I spent the next several days reviewing every memory from Thanksgiving, every conversation, every interaction, every small detail I had ignored. At first, nothing stood out. Then I remembered something Rachel had said shortly before dinner. It had seemed harmless at the time. She had asked where I was keeping my overnight bag. The question had barely registered in my mind, because several relatives were staying overnight. It wasn't unusual. I remembered casually telling her I had left it in the guest room upstairs. Back then, the information meant nothing. Now it meant everything. Rachel had known exactly where my bag was. She had known long before the necklace disappeared. The realization made my stomach turn. I tried to convince myself it wasn't significant. Lots of people knew where my bag was. Lots of people had access to that room. But the thought refused to leave. A few days later, I met with my attorney. His name was David Mercer, and unlike most people in my life, he still believed I was telling the truth. He wasn't promising miracles. He wasn't claiming the case would disappear. But he listened. When I mentioned Brandon's concerns and Megan's comments about Rachel, he leaned back in his chair. Have either of them said this officially? No. Would they? I hesitated. I don't know. David nodded slowly. Then we need patience. Patience was becoming a word I hated. Patience hadn't stopped me from losing my fiancé. Patience hadn't restored my reputation. Patience hadn't convinced my family I was innocent. Still, he was right. Without evidence, suspicions were just suspicions. As I left his office, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. The call immediately felt unusual. She sounded nervous. Emily, can you come by tonight? Why? I think we need to talk. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, Rachel wasn't there. That alone felt strange. She had practically become a permanent fixture in their home since Thanksgiving. My mother sat at the kitchen table, while my father stood near the window. Both looked uncomfortable. I took a seat. What happened? Neither answered immediately. Finally, my father spoke. Your grandmother wants to sell the lake house. I blinked. What? The lake house had been in our family for decades. Countless holidays and summer vacations had taken place there. Nobody had ever discussed selling it. Why? My mother looked down. She says the family isn't the same anymore. The words hit me harder than I expected. Because deep down, I knew she was right. The family wasn't the same anymore. One accusation had shattered relationships built over generations. Trust had disappeared. People chose sides. And every gathering now carried an uncomfortable tension. Before leaving, I asked where Rachel was. My mother shrugged. She said she had work. Something about the answer felt odd. Rachel rarely missed family conversations, especially important ones. But I pushed the thought aside. That night, however, I received another phone call. This one changed everything. The caller was Megan. She sounded frightened. More frightened than I had ever heard her.
Emily, I think I made a mistake. My pulse immediately quickened. What happened?
I confronted Rachel. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. You did what? I asked her about the things she used to say about you. I stood up from my couch. What did she say? Megan exhaled shakily. She got angry. How angry? There was silence. Then Megan answered. Angrier than I've ever seen her. A chill ran through me. Rachel wasn't known for losing her temper. She was calm, controlled, careful. That was one of the reasons everyone trusted her. What exactly did she say? Megan hesitated. Then she spoke slowly. She asked why I was bringing up old conversations. I waited. And then she asked if I'd talk to you. My heart began pounding. Did you tell her the truth? Yes. The room suddenly felt smaller. How did she react? Megan swallowed. She hung up on me. The two of us sat in silence for a moment. Neither of us needed to say it. Rachel's reaction didn't make sense. Not if she had nothing to hide. Not if she was innocent. After ending the call, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. Rachel wasn't acting like someone wrongly accused of jealousy. She was acting like someone afraid. Afraid of what people might discover. Afraid of questions. Afraid of attention. 3 days later, another unexpected development occurred. Brandon called again. This time, he sounded even more serious. Emily, do you remember Rachel leaving the dining room during Thanksgiving dinner? I frowned. Not really. I do. My grip tightened around the phone. Okay. There was a period of about 20 minutes where nobody seemed to know where she was. The word sent a wave of adrenaline through me. Are you sure? Pretty sure. I closed my eyes. 20 minutes. 20 minutes was more than enough time. Enough time to enter a guest room. Enough time to place a necklace inside a bag. Enough time to return before anyone noticed. For the first time, the impossible theory I had been avoiding started taking shape. Not as a suspicion, as a possibility. A terrifying possibility. But possibilities weren't evidence, and evidence was what I needed. Without evidence, the truth would remain buried. Without evidence, my life would never recover. What I didn't know was that evidence already existed, hidden where nobody expected, stored inside a device Rachel believed was completely private. A device containing information she thought had been erased forever. And in less than 2 weeks, that device would fall into the hands of someone who would uncover a secret, powerful enough to destroy every lie she had told. The hardest part about searching for the truth is that sometimes you don't know whether you're moving closer to it or further away. After my conversations with Brandon and Megan, I finally had reasons to question Rachel's behavior, but I still didn't have proof. I had suspicions. I had inconsistencies. I had a growing feeling that something wasn't right. None of that would clear my name. The case continued moving forward. Court dates were scheduled. Meetings with attorneys became part of my weekly routine. Every time I walked into a courtroom, I felt the weight of hundreds of assumptions pressing down on me. People saw the evidence and reached their conclusions. Very few cared about the possibility that evidence could be manipulated. By that point, I had stopped reading comments online. The articles about my case continued circulating across local news sites and community pages. Strangers discussed my life, as if they knew me personally. Some called me dishonest. Others called me selfish. A few insisted I deserved punishment. None of them knew me. None of them knew the truth. Yet their opinions still hurt. One afternoon, while leaving a meeting with David Mercer, I received a call from Jason. It was the first time he had contacted me in nearly 2 months. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered, "Hello?" There was a brief pause. Emily, hearing his voice, stirred emotions I thought I had buried. "What do you want?" His answer surprised me. "I need to ask you something." I leaned against my car. "Okay. I ran into Rachel yesterday." My stomach tightened immediately. "What about her?" Another pause followed. "Has she always disliked me?" The question caught me completely off guard. "What?" Jason sounded confused. "She made some comments." "What kind of comments?" He hesitated. "Comments about our relationship." I felt my pulse quicken. "What exactly did she say?" "She said maybe everything happened for a reason." I frowned. "That's strange." "That's not all." His voice grew quieter. "She also said maybe I deserved someone better." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The statement didn't make sense. Rachel had always encouraged our relationship, at least publicly. She had helped plan parts of our wedding. She had attended venue visits. She had acted excited for us. So why would she suddenly say something like that? Jason continued. The whole conversation felt weird. A knot formed in my stomach. The more people interacted with Rachel, the more unusual stories seemed to emerge. Stories that didn't fit the image everyone had of her. After ending the call, I spent hours thinking about what Jason had told me. Then another memory surfaced. Years earlier, shortly after Jason and I started dating, Rachel had asked dozens of questions about him. At the time, I thought she was simply curious. Now I wasn't so sure. The thought disturbed me enough that I pushed it away. I didn't want to believe my sister could be jealous of my relationship. I didn't want to believe any of this. But reality wasn't asking what I wanted to believe. Reality was slowly revealing something much darker than sibling rivalry. A few days later, Megan contacted me again. This time, she wanted to meet in person. We chose a small coffee shop on the opposite side of town. The moment she arrived, I could tell she was nervous. She kept glancing around before sitting down. "What's going on?" I asked. Megan took a deep breath. I remembered something. My heart immediately began racing. "What?" She looked down at her coffee. "A few weeks before Thanksgiving, Rachel said something strange." I waited. Megan's expression grew serious. "She told me she was tired of living in your shadow." The words hit me like a punch. For years, I had suspected occasional jealousy. Every sibling experiences that. But hearing it spoken aloud felt different. Much different. "Did she say anything else?" Megan nodded slowly. "She said everyone always chose you." I stared at her. "What does that even mean?" "I don't know." Megan swallowed. But she sounded angry when she said it. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. By the time we finished, a troubling pattern had emerged. Rachel had spent months making comments about me before Thanksgiving. Comments she never made directly to my face. Comments filled with resentment. Comments suggesting she believed I had everything she wanted. The more I listened, the harder it became to ignore what was forming in front of me. A motive. Not proof, but motive. For the first time, I could almost see the outline of what might have happened. Almost. Yet one critical piece remained missing. Evidence. Without evidence, nobody would take these suspicions seriously. Without evidence, Rachel could dismiss everything as misunderstandings. Without evidence, my life would remain exactly as it was. Then, less than a week later, something unexpected happened. Megan called late at night. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. She sounded shaken. "Emily, are you sitting down?" My heart immediately started pounding. "Why?" "I found something." I gripped the phone tightly. "What did you find?" There was silence. Then Megan spoke. "Rachel sold her old laptop last month." I frowned. "Okay." "The buyer contacted me." My confusion deepened. "What does that have to do with anything?" The answer changed everything. The laptop wasn't completely wiped. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I stopped breathing for a second. "What are you saying?" Megan lowered her voice. "And the buyer found messages." Every nerve in my body seemed to come alive. Messages. Not assumptions. Not opinions. Not suspicions. Messages. Actual records. Actual evidence. The kind of evidence that could destroy lies. The kind of evidence that could save me. I stood up so quickly that my chair nearly tipped over. "What messages?" Megan hesitated. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I haven't seen all of them." My heart pounded harder. But from what the buyer told me, Rachel was talking to someone about a plan. The words sent chills through my entire body. A plan. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. A plan. For the first time since my arrest, I felt certain that the truth was within reach. What I didn't know was just how damaging those messages would be. Because hidden inside that laptop wasn't just evidence about the necklace. There were conversations stretching back months. Conversations revealing jealousy, resentment, and intentions nobody had ever imagined. And once those messages were uncovered, Rachel's carefully constructed world would begin collapsing faster than she could stop it. The night Megan told me about the laptop, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my couch staring at my phone, waiting for updates that never came. Every few minutes I checked for new messages. Every few minutes I replayed our conversation in my head. For months, I had been trapped inside a nightmare, where every piece of evidence pointed toward me. Now, for the first time, there was a chance that evidence might point somewhere else. The problem was that I still didn't know exactly what had been found. All I knew was that Rachel's old laptop had ended up in the hands of a stranger, and that some of its contents had survived the deletion process. That alone felt unbelievable. For months, Rachel had appeared calm, careful, in control. She acted like someone who had nothing to fear. If there were messages hidden on that laptop, then perhaps she had made a mistake. And mistakes were exactly what I needed. The following morning, I called Megan before she could call me. She answered immediately. I was about to call you. My pulse quickened. You know something. There was a pause. Maybe. I hated that answer. Megan, I'm serious. I don't have everything yet. Then tell me what you do have. I heard her exhale. The buyer agreed to meet me. I nearly dropped my phone. When? This afternoon. The hours that followed felt endless. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit still. For the first time in months, something larger than fear was taking over. Hope. Dangerous hope. The kind that makes disappointment hurt even more. Around 3 in the afternoon, Megan finally called. I answered before the first ring finished. What happened? Her voice sounded stunned. Emily. The way she said my name immediately told me this wasn't a false alarm. What did you find? The silence lasted several seconds. Then she spoke. Rachel was talking about you. I closed my eyes. How much? A lot. My heart pounded harder. The buyer had apparently recovered fragments of conversations stored inside an old messaging application. Some messages were incomplete. Some were damaged. But enough remained to paint a disturbing picture. Megan began reading portions aloud. None of them directly mentioned the necklace. At least not yet. But they revealed something almost as important. Months before Thanksgiving, Rachel had repeatedly complained about me. Complained about my engagement. Complained about family attention. Complained about the way relatives compared us. Every message carried the same theme. Resentment. Years of it. The more Megan read, the colder I felt. Because this wasn't ordinary sibling jealousy. This was something deeper. Something that had been growing for years. One message stood out more than the others. The wording wasn't exact, because part of it had been damaged. But the meaning remained clear. Rachel had written that she was tired of everyone treating me like the perfect daughter. Tired of hearing my name at family gatherings. Tired of watching people celebrate my accomplishments. I struggled to process what I was hearing. All those years. All those birthdays. All those holidays. And underneath every smile, she had been carrying anger. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because it proved she disliked me. Because it suggested I had never really known her. That evening, I forwarded everything to David Mercer. Within an hour he called. His tone was cautious. These messages help. My heart sank. Help? Yes. That's it? David sighed. Emily, resentment isn't proof of a crime. I knew he was right. I hated that he was right. The messages showed motive. They showed jealousy. They showed hostility. But they didn't prove Rachel planted the necklace. Not yet. Still, David agreed on one important point. The information needed to be preserved. Immediately. If additional data remained on the laptop, it could become critical. For the next several days, efforts were made to recover everything possible. While that process continued, another unexpected event occurred. My mother called. Her voice sounded unusually emotional. Can you come over? I drove to my parents' house that evening. When I arrived, she was sitting alone at the kitchen table. The moment I entered, I noticed she had been crying. My stomach tightened. What happened? She looked at me for several seconds before speaking. Then she asked a question I never expected. Do you think Rachel hates you? The words hit me like a truck. For a moment, I couldn't answer. What? My mother wiped her eyes. I need an honest answer. I sat down slowly. Why would you ask that? She stared at the table. Then she revealed something that changed everything. Earlier that week, she had discovered an old journal while cleaning boxes in the attic. A journal Rachel had written as a teenager. At first, it seemed harmless. Typical teenage frustrations. Typical complaints. But as she continued reading, a pattern emerged. Page after page contained references to me. Comparisons. Resentment. Anger. The entries stretched across years. Years. I felt a chill run through me. Because this wasn't a recent issue. This wasn't something triggered by my engagement. This wasn't something triggered by Thanksgiving. The feelings had existed long before any of that. Long before adulthood. Long before careers. Long before relationships. They had been growing since childhood. My mother looked devastated. I don't understand. Neither did I. At least not completely. But for the first time, my parents were beginning to see something they had missed for years. The daughter they believed was always supportive. The daughter they trusted without question. The daughter who stood beside me during every crisis. Might not be who they thought she was. When I left that night, my emotions were all over the place. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt heartbroken. Because no matter what happened next, one truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Rachel had spent years carrying feelings she never revealed. And now those feelings were finally coming to light. What none of us knew was that the most important discovery had not yet been recovered. Hidden among the remaining files on Rachel's laptop was a conversation that mentioned Thanksgiving directly. A conversation that had survived deletion by pure chance. And once that conversation was uncovered, the case against me would begin falling apart, piece by piece. The following week felt like waiting for the results of a medical test that could change your entire life. Every day seemed longer than the one before it. Every phone call made my heart race. Every notification made me reach for my phone. The laptop had become the center of everything. For months, I had lived under a cloud of suspicion. Now that cloud was beginning to crack. The problem was that cracks weren't enough. I needed the truth, and I needed proof. Without proof, Rachel could deny everything. Without proof, the messages already recovered would simply look like jealousy and frustration. Uncomfortable, yes. Damaging, yes. But not enough to clear my name. David Mercer remained cautious throughout the process. Every time I spoke with him, he reminded me not to celebrate too early. We still don't know what we're going to find. I know. We need facts, Emily. I know. But deep down, I felt something shifting. For the first time, I wasn't the only person asking questions. My parents were asking questions. Megan was asking questions. Brandon was asking questions. Even Jason had started reaching out more frequently. People were no longer looking at me with certainty. They were beginning to look at Rachel the same way they once looked at me. And that frightened me. Not because I wanted revenge, because I knew how quickly suspicion could destroy a person's life. A few days later, I received a call from Jason. His voice sounded different, less distant, less defensive. "Can we meet?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me still remembered the day he removed his engagement ring. But another part of me knew this conversation was inevitable. We met at a small cafe near the lake, the same place where we had spent countless weekends during happier times. When I arrived, Jason was already there. He stood as I approached. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked down. "I owe you an apology." The words caught me off guard. I sat across from him. "For what?" He laughed bitterly. "For a lot of things." The pain in his voice sounded genuine. "I should have trusted you." I looked away. Months earlier, those words were all I wanted to hear. Now they felt complicated. "You believed the evidence. So did everyone else." The answer wasn't wrong, but it still hurt. Jason leaned forward. "I've been thinking about everything." I remained silent. Especially Rachel. The mention of her name immediately changed the atmosphere. "What about her?" He rubbed his hands together. There were things I ignored. My pulse quickened. "What things?" Jason hesitated. Then he spoke carefully. "Do you remember our engagement party?" I nodded. Rachel got upset. I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Not publicly." His expression darkened. But later that night, she told me something strange. Every nerve in my body seemed to wake up. "What did she say?" Jason looked uncomfortable. "She asked if I was sure." "Sure about what?" "Marrying you." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" I didn't think much of it at the time. My mind raced. "Why didn't you tell me?" He shook his head. "Because it seemed harmless." The more he spoke, the more disturbed I became. Rachel had apparently made several unusual comments throughout our engagement. Comments Jason dismissed as jokes. Comments that seemed insignificant on their own. But together, they painted a troubling picture. A picture of someone unhappy about our relationship. Someone who wasn't celebrating my future. Someone who might have wanted that future to disappear. After leaving the cafe, I sat in my car for nearly 30 minutes. Every new detail seemed to point in the same direction. Rachel's resentment wasn't limited to family attention. It wasn't limited to childhood comparisons. It touched every major part of my life. My career, my relationships, my accomplishments, everything. That evening, another breakthrough arrived. Megan called. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something important had happened. "Emily, what is it?" They recovered more messages. I gripped the phone tightly. My heartbeat accelerated. "What do they say?" There was a pause. Then Megan answered. "One of them mentions Thanksgiving." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Thanksgiving. The very day everything fell apart. What exactly does it say? The message wasn't complete. Parts of it had been damaged, but enough survived to reveal something important. According to Megan, Rachel had been chatting with an online friend several weeks before Thanksgiving. Most of the conversation was ordinary. Then the topic shifted. Rachel began discussing family gatherings, family expectations, family comparisons. At one point, she wrote a sentence that made my blood run cold. "I have a way to make everyone finally see her differently." The room seemed to spin around me. I lowered myself onto the couch. "What?" Megan repeated the line, word for word. I felt sick. The message didn't mention a necklace. It didn't mention theft. But it did mention intent. Intent to damage my reputation. Intent to change how people viewed me. Intent to make people stop admiring me. For the first time, there was evidence connecting Rachel's resentment to deliberate action. Not enough to prove everything, but enough to raise serious questions. The information was immediately shared with David. This time, even he sounded surprised. "That's significant." My heart pounded. Significant enough. Maybe. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was progress. Real progress. The next morning, something happened that nobody expected. My father called. And for the first time since my arrest, he sounded afraid. Not for me, for Rachel. "Emily," he said quietly, "I think your mother and I need to talk to your sister." The words carried a weight I had never heard before. Because deep down, my parents were finally starting to believe something they had resisted for months. The possibility that the wrong daughter had been accused. And while we were still searching for the final proof, Rachel was beginning to realize the walls were closing in. The messages, the journal, the questions from friends, the doubts within the family. All of it was building pressure. Pressure Rachel had managed to avoid for months. But pressure has a way of finding weak points. And very soon, one unexpected confrontation would force Rachel into a mistake she could never take back. By the time part 10 of this story began, something had fundamentally changed inside our family. For months, everyone had focused on me. Every conversation revolved around my actions, my choices, my supposed crime. I had become the center of suspicion. But now, the attention was shifting, slowly, uneasily. People weren't accusing Rachel yet. Most of them weren't even willing to say her name out loud when discussing their doubts. But the questions were there. And once questions begin, they rarely stay quiet. A few days after my father called, my parents invited Rachel over for dinner. They didn't tell her why. They simply said they wanted to spend time together as a family. At least, that was the excuse they gave her. The truth was very different. My mother had reached a point where she could no longer ignore what she had discovered in the journal. My father could no longer dismiss the recovered messages. Neither of them wanted to believe their daughter was capable of something so cruel. But neither could pretend the evidence didn't exist. I wasn't invited to the dinner. At first, that bothered me. Then I realized it was probably for the best. If Rachel felt cornered, my presence would only make things worse. That evening felt endless. I kept checking my phone. I kept wondering what was happening inside that house. Around 9 o'clock, my father finally called. The moment I answered, I knew something had gone wrong. What happened? There was silence. Then he sighed heavily. She got defensive. My stomach tightened. What did you ask her? We asked about the messages. I sat down immediately. And? She said they were jokes. Of course she did. It was exactly the kind of explanation someone would give when they couldn't deny the messages existed. What about the journal? Another pause followed. Then my father answered. She blamed childhood frustration. I rubbed my forehead. Every answer sounded rehearsed. Every answer sounded prepared. Almost as if she had already anticipated these questions. Then my father said something unexpected. She got angry when we mentioned Megan. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Her entire attitude changed. I listened carefully. According to my father, Rachel remained calm throughout most of the conversation. Calm, until Megan's name entered the discussion. Then, everything shifted. She started asking questions. How much had Megan said? When had she said it? Who else knew? The reaction immediately caught my parents' attention. Because it wasn't the response of someone defending herself. It was the response of someone worried about information. When the dinner ended, Rachel left abruptly. She didn't stay for dessert. She didn't hug my mother goodbye. She simply grabbed her coat and walked out. The moment she left, my parents knew something was wrong. Not because they had proof, because they had never seen her behave that way before. The next morning, Megan called me in a panic. Her voice was shaking. Rachel came to my apartment. My heart nearly stopped. What? Last night. I stood up. What happened? Megan explained that Rachel had shown up unexpectedly, shortly after leaving my parents' house. At first, she acted normal. Then the conversation became uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Rachel wanted to know exactly what Megan had told me. She wanted details. Dates, conversations, names. The more questions she asked, the more nervous Megan became. Finally, Megan asked her directly, "Why are you so worried?" The room apparently went silent. For several seconds, Rachel said nothing. Then she laughed. A forced laugh, the kind people use when they're trying to hide something. After that, she left. But not before saying something that continued haunting Megan. Something she couldn't stop thinking about. Something she repeated to me over the phone. People should stop digging into things that don't concern them. The words sent a chill through my body. Because this wasn't the Rachel everyone knew. This wasn't the supportive sister who brought groceries. This wasn't the caring daughter who comforted our parents. This was someone else. Someone desperate. Someone afraid. Later that afternoon, David called with another update. The recovery specialists were still working through files from the laptop. Progress was slow, but new material continued appearing. Most of it was irrelevant. Old photos, random conversations, work documents. Then one discovery caught everyone's attention. A deleted folder. The folder itself wasn't unusual. What was unusual was its name, the date attached to it. And when it had been deleted, the folder had been removed just 2 days after Thanksgiving. 2 days after the necklace disappeared. 2 days after my life fell apart. Nobody knew what had been inside it. Not yet. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The specialists began focusing their efforts there, trying to recover whatever remained. Meanwhile, another unexpected development occurred. Jason called again. This time, he wasn't apologizing. This time, he sounded concerned. "Emily, I think someone was watching your social media." I frowned. What? He explained that Rachel had somehow known details about private posts he had shared months earlier. Posts she shouldn't have seen. Posts visible only to a small group of people. The information seemed minor, but it revealed something unsettling. Rachel had been paying attention. A lot of attention. Far more attention than anyone realized. By now, a picture was beginning to emerge. Not a complete picture, but enough to reveal a pattern. Jealousy, resentment, obsession, carefully hidden beneath years of smiles and family gatherings. The question was no longer whether Rachel carried resentment toward me. That question had already been answered. The real question was much bigger. How far was she willing to go because of it? The answer was waiting inside that deleted folder. A folder Rachel clearly didn't want anyone to see. And within days, recovery specialists would uncover its contents. When they did, they would discover evidence so damaging that even Rachel would struggle to explain it away. Evidence that would finally connect her to the events of Thanksgiving. Evidence that would force everyone in the family to confront a truth they had spent months avoiding. And once that truth came out, there would be no going back. The next few days were some of the most nerve-wracking days of my life. For months, I had been the one living under pressure. I had been the one waiting for phone calls, court dates, and decisions that could change my future. But now, for the first time, it felt like someone else was carrying that burden. Rachel. I couldn't prove it yet, but I could feel it. The calm confidence she had shown for months was beginning to crack. Her conversations with my parents had become tense. Her friendship with Megan was falling apart. More people were asking questions. More people were noticing inconsistencies. And somewhere in the middle of all of it sat the laptop. The laptop that refused to stay silent. Every morning I woke up wondering whether that would be the day everything changed. Every evening I went to bed disappointed. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was David. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something had happened. "Emily!" His tone sounded different. More focused. More serious. I immediately sat down. What is it? There was a brief pause. Then he spoke. They recovered part of the deleted folder. My heart nearly stopped. For several seconds I couldn't say a word. What did they find? David exhaled slowly. Documents. I frowned. What kind of documents? We're still reviewing everything. The answer frustrated me. David. I know. His voice softened. But listen carefully. My grip tightened around the phone. What? One of the recovered files appears to contain a timeline. The room suddenly felt very small. A timeline? Yes. My pulse raced. A timeline of what? There was another pause. Then David answered. Events leading up to Thanksgiving. I closed my eyes. For months I had imagined this moment. The moment something concrete would finally appear. The moment suspicion would begin turning into evidence. What does it say? We don't know everything yet. Of course we didn't. Nothing in this nightmare ever came quickly. Still, David shared what little information had been confirmed. The file contained dates, notes, reminders, fragments of plans. Many sections were damaged beyond recovery. Others remained incomplete. But one detail immediately stood out. The document had been created by Rachel. There was no doubt about that. Her user profile was attached to the file. Her account information appeared throughout the metadata. The discovery alone was significant. But what mattered most was one specific entry, an entry dated 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. A short sentence. Only a few words. Yet those words stayed with me long after the call ended. Everything has to happen that day. I stared at the wall after hearing it. Everything has to happen that day. The sentence could mean anything. Or it could mean exactly what everyone feared. Neither possibility left me feeling comfortable. Later that evening, David sent over a summary of the findings. I read it repeatedly. Each time, the same thought returned. The file didn't prove Rachel framed me. Not yet. But it suggested preparation, planning, intent, and intent was becoming harder for her to explain away. The following morning brought another surprise. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. The moment I opened the door, I noticed tears in her eyes. She looked exhausted, completely exhausted. I invited her inside. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I don't know who your sister is anymore. The words hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything that had happened, I still loved Rachel. I still remembered the little girl who followed me around the house. The teenager who borrowed my clothes. The sister who celebrated birthdays and holidays beside me. Part of me wanted all of this to be a misunderstanding. Part of me wanted another explanation. But with every new discovery, that possibility became harder to believe. My mother looked down at her hands. She came over last night. My stomach tightened. What happened? She wanted to know whether we'd spoken to you. The question itself wasn't surprising. The rest was. According to my mother, Rachel spent most of the visit trying to convince them that everyone was overreacting. She insisted Megan was lying. She insisted the recovered messages lacked context. She insisted people were trying to destroy her reputation. Then she made a mistake, a very important mistake. While defending herself, Rachel accidentally mentioned information she shouldn't have known. Information that had never been shared with her. My heart started pounding. What information? My mother swallowed hard. The deleted folder. I stared at her. What? My mother nodded slowly. She knew about it. A chill ran through my body. The recovery work had been kept private. Only a handful of people knew the deleted folder existed. Rachel was not supposed to be one of them. Yet somehow she knew. Worse still, she knew before anyone mentioned it. The realization sent alarm bells ringing. Because there was only one logical explanation. Rachel wasn't worried about what investigators might discover. She was worried because she already knew what was inside. That afternoon, David received another update from the recovery specialists. More files had been restored. Most were damaged. Some were useless. Then one recovered conversation changed everything. The conversation wasn't between Rachel and Megan. It wasn't between Rachel and a family member. It was between Rachel and an online friend. A friend she apparently trusted enough to speak openly. The messages stretched across several months. Most were ordinary. Then one section caught everyone's attention. Rachel began discussing Thanksgiving, family gatherings, and me. One particular message stood out from the rest. Not because it directly confessed anything, because of what it implied. According to the recovered text, Rachel wrote, "After this, nobody will see her the same way again." I felt sick when David read the message aloud, not because of the words themselves, because I knew exactly what had happened after Thanksgiving. Nobody had seen me the same way again. My family changed. My engagement ended. My reputation collapsed. My entire life unraveled. And months before it happened, Rachel appeared to be predicting it, planning for it, maybe even counting on it. For the first time since my arrest, David stopped sounding cautious. Not optimistic, but cautious. That change alone told me how serious the situation had become, because the pieces were finally beginning to connect. The journal, the resentment, the messages, the deleted folder, the strange behavior, the hidden conversations. Separately, each piece raised questions. Together, they formed something much bigger, something impossible to ignore. And what nobody realized yet was that the most damaging evidence had still not been recovered. Buried deep inside the remaining files was a conversation from just days before Thanksgiving. A conversation containing a detail so specific that it would shatter Rachel's entire defense. A detail capable of proving she knew exactly where the necklace would be found before anyone else did. And once that evidence surfaced, the truth would no longer be a theory, it would be a fact. The call came on a Monday morning. I remember the exact moment, because I had spent the entire weekend expecting disappointment. For months, every promising lead had eventually ended with more questions than answers. Every breakthrough seemed to create another obstacle. By then, I had learned not to get my hopes up. So when David's name appeared on my phone, I answered with cautious optimism. "Good morning." There was no small talk, no introduction, no hesitation. "Emily, I need you to come to my office." My heart immediately started racing. What happened? A brief silence followed. Then he said 4 words that changed everything. We found the evidence. For several seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe properly. The evidence. Not a clue. Not a theory. Not another suspicious message. Evidence. Real evidence. The kind that changes lives. The kind that ends arguments. The kind that forces people to face the truth. Less than an hour later, I was sitting across from David in his office. Several printed documents were spread across his desk. Beside them sat a laptop. The same laptop that had slowly been revealing Rachel's secrets piece by piece. David looked more serious than I had ever seen him. This is it. I stared at him. What did you find? He slid a document toward me. A recovered conversation. I looked down. The messages had been exchanged only 5 days before Thanksgiving. Most of the conversation was ordinary. Then one section made my blood run cold. The person Rachel was speaking to had asked whether she was nervous about her plan. Her plan. Even seeing those words in writing felt surreal. Rachel's response was worse. Far worse. According to the recovered messages, she described exactly how she intended to make sure suspicion landed on me. Not in complete detail. Some portions remained damaged. But one sentence survived perfectly. One sentence that destroyed everything. I know exactly where she'll leave her overnight bag. My hands began shaking. I read the line again. Then again. Then again. Because there was no innocent explanation. No misunderstanding. No missing context. The statement proved something critical. Rachel knew in advance where my bag would be. Not after the necklace disappeared. Not after the search began. Before Thanksgiving even happened. Before anyone could claim coincidence. Before anyone could claim confusion. The evidence was devastating. But it wasn't finished. David pointed to another recovered section. This one contained a message sent the day after Thanksgiving. A message Rachel apparently believed had been permanently deleted. I stared at the screen. The words blurred for a moment before coming into focus. I didn't think it would work this well. The room fell silent. I felt tears filling my eyes. Months. Months of humiliation. Months of pain. Months of losing people I loved. And somewhere during those months, Rachel had been privately celebrating the success of her plan. I covered my mouth. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me simply felt numb. The nightmare I had been living was finally making sense. Everything. The necklace in my bag. The necklace in my apartment. The timing. The manipulation. The fake concern. The supportive phone calls. The comforting hugs. It had all been an act. David allowed me a few moments before continuing. The evidence has already been forwarded to investigators. I looked up. What happens now? For the first time since I've known you, Emily. The burden is no longer on you. Those words hit me harder than anything else. For months, I had been trying to prove my innocence. Now Rachel would have to explain the evidence. And that was a much harder task. The following week moved faster than any week since my arrest. Investigators reopened key portions of the case. Additional interviews were conducted. Digital evidence was reviewed. Timelines were reconstructed. And one by one, the conclusions became unavoidable. Rachel had both motive and opportunity. She knew where my bag was located. She had expressed years of resentment. She had discussed changing how people viewed me. And now, there were messages directly connecting her to preparations made before Thanksgiving. The walls were closing in. Everyone knew it, including Rachel. Then came the moment none of us will ever forget. My parents invited the entire family to my grandmother's house. The same house where everything had started. The same house where my life had fallen apart. The atmosphere that evening felt completely different from Thanksgiving. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was celebrating. Everyone understood why they were there. When Rachel arrived, she immediately sensed something was wrong. I could see it in her face. The confidence she once carried was gone. My father stood first. His voice trembled as he spoke. Then he presented the evidence. The messages, the timeline, the recovered files, the statements from Megan. Everything. One piece after another. The room remained silent. Rachel didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She didn't deny anything. At least not at first. The silence lasted several minutes. Then my grandmother asked a question. A simple question. The same question everyone wanted answered. Why? Rachel began crying. Real crying. Not the controlled tears she had shown for months. Not the carefully managed emotions she displayed after my arrest. These were different. The truth had finally caught up to her. For several moments she couldn't speak. Then she looked at me, and what she said shattered every remaining illusion. I was tired. The room remained silent. Rachel wiped her eyes. Tired of being compared. More tears followed. Tired of feeling invisible. She admitted that years of jealousy had grown into resentment. Resentment had become anger. And anger had become a plan. She never expected things to go as far as they did. At least that was what she claimed. But by then, nobody knew what to believe anymore. Not after everything. The confession lasted nearly an hour. Some family members cried. Others sat in stunned silence. My mother looked heartbroken. My father looked defeated. My grandmother seemed older than I had ever seen her. As for me, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Relief. The truth was finally out. The nightmare was finally over. In the weeks that followed, the charges against me were dropped. My name was cleared. Public records were corrected. The accusations disappeared. But healing took much longer. Trust does not return overnight. Families do not recover instantly. Some wounds remain long after the truth comes out. Jason eventually apologized for abandoning me when I needed him most. My relatives apologized for doubting me. Even my grandmother asked for forgiveness. But the most difficult apology came from Rachel. Because some betrayals change relationships forever. You may forgive, you may move forward, but you never forget. Today, when people ask me what I learned from everything that happened, my answer is always the same. The most painful betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from the people you trust enough to never suspect. And sometimes, the truth takes longer to arrive than you think. But eventually, it arrives. And when it does, no lie is strong enough to stand against it.